Entitled People, Episode Number 1. Telling my dad about the Karen meme. My family has always been the type that overshares. Nobody really filters what they say, and while it is usually harmless, it also means that context sometimes gets lost in a way that causes unnecessary problems. My parents are older and not especially online. I was talking to my dad on the phone a few days before his birthday dinner, just catching up. I asked how my mom was doing, and he casually told me a story about a recent trip to the store. My mom and my aunt were shopping together. The cashier made a small mistake, and my aunt immediately escalated the situation. She raised her voice, demanded to speak to the manager, and refused to calm down. My mom was embarrassed and tried to smooth things over, but it did not work. Without really thinking, I laughed and said, "That's such a Karen thing." My dad replied, "Yeah, your aunt does that a lot." I then explained what I meant. I told him about the Karen meme, how it is a common internet joke about an entitled woman who overreacts to minor issues and asks for the manager. I explained that it is not about one specific person, just a general stereotype that became popular online. He thought this was hilarious, especially when I mentioned that my aunt even has the stereotypical haircut associated with the meme. I sent him a few links so he could see what I was talking about. That turned out to be a mistake. Over the next few days, my dad went deep into internet searches and image results. He started sending me random memes of Karens behaving badly, adding comments like, "Your aunt did this last week," or "This one reminds me of her." He clearly found it funny and did not see any harm in it. I assumed he was just sharing them with me and did not think much more about it. Then came his birthday dinner. The whole extended family was there. Everything was going well. People were relaxed, talking, eating, and having drinks. In the middle of the meal, my aunt, who was sitting a few seats away from me, leaned forward and loudly said my name. She asked, in front of everyone, "What is this whole thing about you making a meme about me?" I was completely confused and just said, "What?" She then explained that my dad had been sending her all these images and jokes about her behavior. He never explained that these were generic internet memes or what the concept behind them was. From her perspective, it looked like I had created a series of jokes and images online specifically to mock her real-life behavior. At that point, the rest of the table got involved. Several family members assumed I had made an online joke about my aunt and spread it around. The conversation quickly turned into people telling me how rude and disrespectful that was. My aunt was clearly upset and started lecturing me loudly about embarrassment and family loyalty. Ironically, she was behaving exactly like the stereotype we were talking about. I kept looking at my dad, waiting for him to explain what actually happened. He seemed surprised by how badly the situation had been misunderstood, but it took him a moment to step in. Eventually, he explained that the Karen meme is a widely known internet joke, that I did not create it, and that he had simply been sending her examples he found online without realizing she would take it personally. Even after that explanation, my aunt stayed irritated for the rest of the evening. It was obvious she felt embarrassed, especially once she realized how closely her behavior matched the stereotype, and that she could not tell the difference between random online stories and her own public confrontations. The dinner eventually moved on, but the tension lingered, and I learned the hard way that explaining internet culture to someone who does not fully understand it can go very wrong once it leaves your control. Entitled Client learns that professionals can walk away. I work as an engineer, and occasionally I do consulting work on the side. I am very selective about it and usually only agree to help people I know personally, mostly as a favor rather than as a business venture. I do not advertise it. I do not need the extra income, and I generally avoid complicated projects unless there is a good reason. In this case, a close friend asked me to help his in-laws. They had just bought an old house and were planning a fairly large renovation and addition. From the description alone, it was obvious that the project was going to be messy. Old houses tend to hide problems, and the changes they wanted to make had unexpected complications written all over them. I agreed solely because my friend asked me to. Before I ever spoke to them directly, my friend warned me that his mother-in-law could be difficult. That turned out to be an understatement. From the start, she treated me less like a professional and more like hired help. Even though I was charging a fraction of what a consulting firm would charge, She acted as if paying me anything meant she could dictate my time and behavior. Our email exchanges were tense. She was dismissive when I pointed out problems with their plans and clearly did not like being told that some of their ideas would be expensive or complicated to implement. Still, while unpleasant, it was manageable. Things escalated when I needed to visit the house to inspect a few areas in person to verify measurements and existing conditions. I suggested several reasonable options, weekends or evenings after my regular workday. None of those worked for her. Every suggestion was rejected. She insisted that I come by during normal office hours, because that was what was most convenient for her. I explained that I have a full-time job and that site visits would need to happen outside my working hours. That is when her tone shifted completely. She became openly hostile and told me, very directly, that since she was paying me, I was expected to work around her availability, not the other way around. At that point, I added my friend to the email thread and told them I was no longer involved. I wished them luck with whoever they decided to hire next and made it clear I was done. My friend immediately apologized and told me he understood. I told him there were no hard feelings and that it was not his problem. The mother-in-law replied, clearly shocked. She told me that walking away like this was unprofessional and not how business is conducted. I did not respond. About 3 weeks later, I received another email, this time from her husband. He asked if I would reconsider and said he would make sure his wife had no further contact with me and would not be involved in the process at all. By then, I had already heard the rest of the story from my friend. The quotes they received from actual firms were much higher than what I had been charging, but that part they could tolerate. The real issue was timing. They had just bought the house and wanted to move in as soon as possible, but it was a very busy time of year for the industry. Most companies were already booked solid. On top of that, when firms are overloaded with work and see a project that looks complicated and potentially full of surprises, they are not exactly eager to take it on. As a result, design timelines were being pushed out by a month or two. That delay meant they were now at risk of losing the tradespeople they had tentatively lined up, because everything else depended on the design being completed first. I declined the husband's request. I did not believe his wife would actually stay uninvolved, and even if she did, I had no interest in stepping back into a situation I had already exited cleanly. My friend understood completely and told me, honestly, that it was satisfying to watch her attitude finally result in consequences that directly affected her plans. Sometimes the most valuable lesson is learning that not everyone can be pushed around, and that even professionals are free to walk away. Coworker reported me to HR for not inviting her to my wedding. This is easily one of the strangest situations I have ever had to deal with at work. There is a woman in my office that I am friendly with in the most basic sense. We make small talk when we pass each other, occasionally chat about work-related things, and that is the extent of it. We do not eat lunch together, we do not talk outside of work, and we have never socialized one-on-one. I would describe her as a coworker I am polite with, not a friend. At some point, she found out that I was engaged and planning a wedding. One day she asked when the wedding was. I told her the date. Then she immediately asked if she was invited. I was caught a little off guard, but I laughed it off and said something like, "Oh no, it's really small, just close friends and family." That was the honest truth. We were keeping the guest list tight for budget and personal reasons, and most coworkers were not invited. She got noticeably quiet after that. The conversation ended awkwardly, but I assumed it was just one of those moments where expectations did not match reality, and it would blow over. A few days later, I received a meeting invite from HR with no real explanation. During the meeting, HR explained that a complaint had been filed against me. According to the complaint, I was being exclusive and creating a hostile work environment by leaving people out. It took me a moment to understand what they were even talking about. Then it became clear that this was about the wedding invitation. I had to calmly explain that my wedding was a private, personal event. It was not work-related, it was not a company function, and I was not excluding coworkers from anything connected to the workplace. I explained that I barely knew this person outside of work and that I was not obligated to invite every coworker to my wedding, especially one I was paying for myself. HR honestly looked as confused as I felt. They asked a couple of clarifying questions, mostly to confirm that this was not tied to work events or favoritism in the office. Once that was clear, they told me that there was no issue and that the matter was closed. The meeting ended quickly and professionally, but the situation did not end there. Since then, she has been noticeably passive-aggressive toward me. Nothing overt enough to report, but things like side eyes when I walk past, pointed silence in group conversations, and sarcastic comments just loud enough for me to hear. She has made remarks along the lines of, "Some people are really big on inclusivity these days," clearly directed at me. I still cannot wrap my head around what she thought would happen. I genuinely do not understand how she expected HR to respond, or what outcome she was hoping for. There was never any indication that we were close, and the wedding was never presented as a work-related event. It has been an uncomfortable reminder that some people genuinely believe every personal decision made by others somehow revolves around them. Ex thought I should fund her life after cheating on me. I was with my ex for 11 years. We were not married and we did not have kids, but we had built a long-term life together. I was the primary provider. I am not wealthy, but I made enough to give us a comfortable lifestyle. I paid most of the bills, covered rent, and handled the majority of shared expenses. She rarely had to worry about money. I paid for her hair and nails regularly. We went on dates almost every weekend, and we took a couple of vacations every year. Over time, that level of support became normal to her. Eventually, I found out she was cheating on me. What made it worse was that the guy she was cheating with was unemployed. She never admitted to the affair directly, but the signs became impossible to ignore. Once it was clear what was happening, I ended the relationship. That was when her sense of entitlement really came out. Her first demand was that I should move out of the place I was paying for. Her reasoning was that I had family in the area and she did not, so it would be easier for me to leave. Not only that, she expected me to continue paying all the bills so she and the new guy could get on their feet. She framed it as a reasonable transition period, as if I was obligated to financially support her new relationship. She also insisted on keeping my dogs. She told me that if I wanted to see them, I would need to ask permission from the guy she cheated on me with. At the same time, she said that since they had no money, I would still need to pay for dog food and all veterinary expenses. Instead, I kicked her out and kept my dogs. That did not go over well. Once she was out of the house, she became openly hostile and still seemed convinced she was entitled to my income. She claimed that being forced to move meant she had to quit her job, and that this was somehow my fault. Based on that claim, she tried to sue me for lost wages. That went nowhere. You would think that would have been the end of it, but it was not. After that failed, she contacted my employer. She threatened to sue them, saying that your employee's actions cost me everything. She demanded they settle with her outside of court for $100,000, which was far more than she had ever earned in a year. My workplace did not entertain this at all. Instead, they filed harassment charges against her. That still did not stop her. She started reaching out to my family members. Anyone she could find on social media became a target. She told them I had ruined her life out of spite simply because she had moved on. She said the least they could do was send her money to help her pay rent and get a new place. When that did not work, she went online and began asking strangers for money through cash transfer apps. In those posts, she claimed she was in a domestic violence situation and needed help escaping. None of that was true. What I still cannot understand is how she genuinely seemed shocked that the financial support stopped when the relationship ended. She cheated. We were not married. We had no children. I supported her for years because we were together, not because I was obligated to fund her life indefinitely. I do not owe her anything, and I certainly do not owe it to her to help establish her new relationship with the person she cheated on me with. The fact that this reality came as a surprise to her says more than anything else ever could. My friend thought I owed her part of my inheritance. A few months ago, my great-aunt passed away. We were not extremely close, but we had a good relationship, and I was genuinely sad to lose her. In her will, she left me an inheritance. It was not life-changing money, but it was significant enough to make a real difference for me. I was able to pay off my student loans and put a small amount aside for savings. Mostly, it gave me some breathing room for the first time in years. I mentioned this to a friend of mine over lunch. I will call her Rachel. We had known each other for a long time, mostly from school, and while we were not inseparable, I considered her a good friend. When I told her about the inheritance, her reaction immediately felt off. She got quiet, then said, "Wow, must be nice. I bet you'll help out your friends who weren't so lucky growing up." I assumed she was making an awkward comment out of envy and tried to keep things light. I laughed and said something like, "I mean, I'll probably treat my friends to dinner more often." She did not laugh back. She looked at me and said very seriously, "No, like, actually help. We've known each other forever. I think it would be fair if you split it." At first, I genuinely thought she was joking. I waited for a smile or some indication that she was exaggerating. It never came. She went on to explain her reasoning. She reminded me of how her family struggled financially when we were younger, unlike mine. She brought up random things from years ago, like times she had paid for my coffee in college or covered small expenses when I was short on cash. Then she said, "This is just the universe evening the score." That was the moment it really hit me that she was serious. She honestly believed that my inheritance was something I owed her, as if it were communal property or some delayed repayment for friendship. I told her no. I explained that this money came from a family member, that it was intended for me, and that I was using it to take care of my own responsibilities. I did not raise my voice or insult her, but I was very clear that I was not giving her any of it. The lunch ended awkwardly, and after that, she stopped reaching out. A short time later, I realized she had blocked me on Instagram. Not long after that, mutual friends started mentioning that she was telling people I had ghosted her after I got rich. According to her version of events, I had suddenly become selfish and cut her off once money entered the picture. What actually happened is that I refused to hand over money I did not owe her. I am still a little stunned that she ever thought this was a reasonable request. Friendship is not a financial contract, and an inheritance is not a group prize to be divided up based on who feels they deserve it. I did not lose sleep over the money. I lost sleep over realizing that someone I thought was a friend was quietly keeping a mental tab and waiting for a payout. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And if you have your own entitled people story, be sure to share it in the comments. See you next time.